Well, what qualifies as art, and how is that definition changing? Tonight we're exploring some of the unique and sometimes surprising forms that art takes on here in St. Louis, so stay tuned.
And on Stay Tuned, you drive the discussion. We bring local experts, journalists, and civic leaders together to have tough conversations for a stronger St. Louis. Tweet us your insights on tonight's topic, and you've got a seat at the table. With a few national experts and a panel of community members, this is the show bringing more light and less heat to the issues that matter. So stay tuned.
Okay, we're going to start with me practicing the art of false humility. I have to give a nod to Margie Enright, Maya Northfleet, and all of the crew behind the scenes here. A-list Best News Program 2014 in St. Louis Magazine for Stay Tuned. So thank you for helping us do that. Okay, in just a second, we have the Executive Director of St. Louis Fringe. If you haven't heard of that, you're going to enjoy that conversation. But before we talk to M. Piro, we went out into the neighborhood to get an explanation of exactly what this is.
It's quiet now, but this past weekend, Grand Center played host to the 3rd annual St. Louis Fringe, a 4-day, unjuried performing arts festival that gives local artists a platform for their work, whether it's finely polished or still in an experimental phase. Producers submit their ideas in January and are given a venue and show times at the festival based upon either a first-come, first-accepted system or by random lottery drawing, which means the artists have complete creative freedom from concept to final bow.
This particular framework is meant to be a place where people are not only allowed to take risks, they're encouraged to do so. We want people to have an accessible setting where they don't really need to worry about creating a proposal that's going to appeal to a jury panel.
They also receive all ticket sales for their show, as well as creative support and mentorship from the festival itself. This incubatory environment sets them free to take creative challenges, to collaborate in ways and with people they may not have dared to or thought of before.
We want people to be inspired by each other and connect with each other, and we want people to work together to make this work and make it more interesting and more exciting and more rich and more with a unique voice that's unique to our city.
It also gives them the chance to perform new work for an audience in a relaxed setting. On a deeper level, it challenges the artists to take stock of their own tenacity, adaptability, and commitment. Because although many of them have been working at their craft for years, it takes a lot of guts to produce and perform your own material.
Through the clouds, can you hear them coming down?
The intimate, immersive venues contribute to the visceral nature of many of the shows, whether it's improv comedy or straight drama. This year saw the festival take advantage of Grand Center's unique mix of galleries and theaters, growing into 5 spaces, including the Duet Gallery, the stage at KDHX, Satori, the Kransberg Art Center, and Fubar, where a pretty spectacular dance-off took place between hip-hop and Lindy Hop dancers.
The change that has happened in this neighborhood, it's been arts driven and arts focused. I'm just absolutely inspired by the physical, tangible impact that the arts can have on the revitalization of a neighborhood and of a city.
Marcy doesn't know what it is! It's C4, man! Hey, I don't think it knows what it is.
Audience members are encouraged to fill out a survey at every performance they attend to give both the festival organizers and the artists feedback.
Take a take, take a take.
As I filled out my surveys, I kept coming back to the same question. Why does this work in St. Louis? Is it because the city, viewed by some outsiders as provincial, is actually quite open-minded, ready to support those who are emerging, along with those who are already established? Or is it the artists themselves, locals and transplants, that are changing the city and making independent performing arts more accessible and engaging to a wider audience? It seems to be a bit of both, with events like the St. Louis Fringe Festival providing local artists and audiences with plenty of room to grow.
Thanks to the 9 Network's Kara Van Inger for that report. And now we are here with the Executive Director of St. Louis Fringe, Em Pirro. Em, you talk a lot about saying yes to the artist.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you brought that up. I kind of identified this phrase this year that I've been throwing around a lot that I call a radical yes. I found in my experience before administering the Fringe Festival, I was an artist as well, and I found that I got hit with the word no pretty frequently, which I found surprising in a creative industry. You know, I kind of brought up in a school of thought of say yes, take risks, go as far and be as bold as you can, and then you can always rein it in afterwards, but you have to see how far you can go first. And I didn't find the community particularly nurturing of that, so I wanted to provide an outlet for it. And so we challenge ourselves to say yes all the time, you know, to everybody who comes to the table, you know, within our cap of basically seats that we have, you know, anybody who can come and who wants to come is welcome. And we let them determine their own goals and their own parameters, then we work with them to say, how can we help you be successful? But we don't try to contrive what they're doing in any kind of way. We leave it to them. And we see really, really incredible things emerge from that.
There aren't any, is there a downside to say? I mean, doesn't a no sometimes come in the form of a parameter that maybe spurs creativity?
That's a really good point. And I think that, yes, I mean, you have to work within the framework that you have available to you, and you have to be successful within that. But we let people determine that themselves rather than sending it in from the outside. So we don't say, no, that doesn't sound good, or we don't think that will be successful, or this, that, or the other. We let people decide for themselves, like, okay, well, maybe I had a really lofty idea and it's not really working, or I'm going to reframe that, rework it, or sometimes they step out altogether, but at least we gave them the chance. And we found that, you know, we just explode with submissions for the festival, and we think that it's really, the artist's presence is here and wants and needs that outlet, and we're really, really proud to be able to give it to them.
Okay, so is St. Louis a good place or an easy place to say yes?
I think it's getting there. I think it's absolutely growing and heading in that direction. I moved here 10 years ago, and it's certainly more of a yes city than it was when I came. I think that Fringe has the potential to do better in this city than it does in some other cities. I grew up in Seattle, and Fringe has never really had a very stronghold there. I'm very excited about the opportunity that this kind of yes and mentality and arts mentality can have in the cultural growth of the entire city and region, where that outlet hasn't really existed in the infrastructure of the city. We, as the artists and doers, can help set that platform for the future. Yeah, so
this is not just a mentality you'd like to see just for this past weekend. Do you see this having a benefit throughout our art community?
Yes, exactly. It's something that we try to showcase and celebrate during the Fringe Festival, but as an artist, I am, you know, already reaping the benefits of this shifting mindset. It hasn't all come from us, but we've been very lucky and fortunate to be able to contribute to a wave that's running that, you know, I've been able to benefit from as an artist, that my friends and peers have been able to experience growth from, because it's something that's really seeping into our city.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but does the Fringe Festival have a little bit of a history in rebellion to some degree around other festivals?
Oh, very true, yeah.
So do we need some rebellion in St. Louis?
Well, maybe. I think rebellion, I think Fringe comes from a place where people have been told no, like I said, and they kind of act in defiance, and they say, you know, well, I'm going to do this anyway. And I think what we're doing is just trying to keep that rebellion is kind of a negative tone to it, and we try to keep it positive. We try to say, yes, we're here to celebrate like the things that are here and the voices that are here, and instead of saying no, we don't like that, we say yes to everything. Does that make sense?
Well, I think so, but I want to know how long can we do that? At some point, don't you have to say no, or is yes sustainable?
So far, we haven't been given a reason to say no. I mean, it's been sustainable for us. It's been growing every year. It's been starting so many really important conversations that we've been able to be a part part of. Until we have a real reason to say no, we're not going to try it. I mean, why not push ourselves to see how far we can go?
So what have you learned? What have you learned from the word yes, from using it the way you're talking about?
You know, I will say that sometimes it's really scary to say yes. You know, sometimes things come to the table that maybe have a little bit of questionable content or a little bit of questionable philosophy behind them, or maybe someone doesn't seem totally prepared, and it's a huge risk on our part, but people always come through in the end. And again, it's up to them to succeed or fail, and even if failure is a lesson, people can still learn from it and grow from it, sometimes even more so than you do from a success. So I think the big thing that I've learned is to just trust this model and go with it. You know, sometimes it's very tempting to re-examine it, but at the end of the day, the community building that comes from it and the blossoming that comes from it that would not happen if you said no is so worth it and so trumps any other options.
Em, you did a great job of touching on a lot of things I feel like we're going to talk to tonight, and we didn't even prep you for that. So thank you very much. Em Pirro, St. Louis Fringe. All right, coming up, we're going to talk to some artists who are doing a lot of what you're talking about now. But first, we want to hear what you're saying. Find us online, Twitter. Stay tuned. Hashtag stay tuned to STL. Okay, so I promised artists who are saying yes, or maybe being a little brave, I call you brave. Let's get right to it and find out what you have to say about this this definition of art that we're talking about here. Introductions first. M.K. Stallings, Urb Art. Urb Development. The long form was Urban Artist Alliance for Child Development, but you like to say
Urb Arts for short.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And also Mallory Nizam, STL Improv Anywhere, and Jamie Jessup, Jessup Design Company, and the curator over a relatively new place called the Art Bar. Okay, so is St. Louis a good place to push the envelope?
As a space for incubation of arts, sure. You know, you get an opportunity to kind of experiment with different sounds, different designs, different forms, different kinds of writing. The question, though, is there enough people to support you once the experimentation takes off? Once you're able to actually develop something that's worth being seen, will there be enough people out there to become like a patron, like a community of patrons to support you as an artist? That's what I don't know if we actually have.
I messed up your name. Tell me what you're doing and how you see this happening in the work that you're doing.
So with Urb Arts, we're about creating platforms and platforming creatives for youth development as well as betterment of community. So with that said, with St. Louis, there are a ton of venues, but the question is, can someone bring these audiences together with the artists so that the artists can have an opportunity to not only have their work heard and to be affirmed, but also maybe to make some money too at something they really want to do as a profession, you know, at least another revenue stream. So that's what we do. We try to create platforms for artists as best we can, and we follow with and, you know, go with a lot of other arts organizations that create platforms for artists in St. Louis.
Good place to push it?
Yeah, actually, you bring up a really great point, which is that I think we have a lot of time, physical space, you know, the cost of living is low, and that creates a lot of opportunities for art making. But the sort of patrons of the arts, or the whole culture of appreciating and wanting to participate in art is still, I think, in a process of growing in St. Louis. And to relate it back to what I do with Improv Anywhere, a lot of what we're trying to do is to kind of hit people with these creative moments in the everyday. And a larger goal of why do we do that is really to remind people that art is everywhere, and that sometimes, even without sort of choosing to have that experience, you're able to to reap sort of the benefit of what it means to have this encounter, and then hopefully that instills the value of those experiences with creative work.
Experiencing art doesn't always come with a ticket stub.
Right. I mean, and that I'm not necessarily promoting, you know, that all art needs to be free or anything, but just like creating that capacity in people to start to crave that a little bit more, to realize that that's sort of a natural human thing to experience something different and creative that challenges you, instead of going throughout your day as through your regular routine and maybe not having those experiences.
Art Bar is different and creative. Tell us what it is.
It's a place where people can come into a normal bar and have a live gallery right across from the bar from them, where they can see a new show every month. So the owners, Tatiana Tonakova and Tom Alaska, I think are kind of ahead of the game on blending these two social meeting places into one. And doing it in Cherokee Street is a great spot to do it. I think it's a nice center for art and development in St. Louis.
Do you see the ability to have a cocktail, maybe crossing some different groups of people who might not otherwise seek out art?
Yeah, we've seen that already over there. There's been people come down who may have not approached Cherokee Street before and have came to shows and had a great time there. I think that they've opened up a great avenue for people, to make it a little more approachable for the common artists to come down and be in a show and hang out with the patrons at the same time, and for people to actually meet them, and it's a different environment.
Do you appreciate the artist more when you can put a face to them, perhaps, whatever the art form might be?
I believe so. I mean, you get to talk to them, and you get to shake their hand and have a drink and go outside and see the street scene for a minute, and yeah.
I think the accessibility and the humanity is really important, because I think there's definitely like an intimidating element to art, or at least like that some people kind of feel that way. And I think about like Contemporary Art Museum's hosting Open Studios this weekend, which is a really great opportunity to humanize art, and to show that it's real people, your neighbors, like a diverse array of human beings that create artwork, and really all people do. Just some people choose to do it more than others.
So are you branching out? Do you see, are you preaching to the choir when you hold exhibits or put on performances, or are you crossing over into other people?
That's marketing. That's marketing. If artists can also master the art of marketing, then you can create new audiences and grow audiences. And unfortunately, when you look at the long history of art in St. Louis, part of the reason why artists leave St. Louis is because they haven't been able to grow audience. And so, social media provides a whole new avenue for reaching out to new groups of people who may not be interested in what you do, or may even know what you do. I know with me in spoken word poetry, we often find new audiences. Some of them like it, some of them don't, but we constantly have a group of people who seem to be interested in what these poets have to say, or what some of our artists have to do. So we try to create a space where, much like the Art Bar, we can bring audience to the artist, and I think that makes a difference. And hopefully, it can become a difference maker for people who are attempting to earn revenue through their craft.
So where do you guys fit in artists who might be considered non-traditional, experimental? Where does that fit in the broader spectrum of our well-established, well-attended, well-respected institutions of art?
Well, I think with institutions of art, the good news is there's a built-in audience, and those individuals perhaps believe that this institution will put nothing but quality performances on their stages. So there's an opportunity for artists to find a platform with these established institutions. But the question is, how accessible are those institutions to everyday artists? That's the reason why St. Louis Fringe is so important. That's the reason why Herb Arts does what it does, because we need to be able to put artists in front of people, real people. Art is democratic in nature. If the people like it, they'll support it, and the artist can eat from it, or the artist can at least feel affirmed. But unfortunately, that doesn't always shake out the way you'd hope. And that's the reason why, again, if you look at the Black Artists Group and other individuals who've been artists or collectives in St. Louis, part of the reason why they fade to the back at some point is because there's just not enough audience to support that. So hopefully these kinds of conversations can bring people together so that artists can be affirmed, can be heard, and be supported in their craft.
Em said it's changing a little bit. It's not quite there in terms of the landscape of St. Louis. How do you see it? You said I think you said you don't want to do this voluntarily for an entire career.
I don't mind. I mean, it's
an artist in general. I mean.
Yeah. Well, I'll do it forever. It doesn't matter. Okay. But
that's bad marketing.
Well,
actually work in marketing. But so to that point, and to round out what you were saying, I think we can all create art all day long, but ultimately, like, if we're trying to create art that pushes boundaries and moves culture forward and challenges people, it is so important who sees it, you know? Like, I see a lot of really great work happening in St. Louis, and sometimes just like the same people come through, right? So that's, honestly, sometimes that's audience can be almost more important than the art itself. And the audience is everything from, you know, how are you marketing, what kind of messaging are you putting it out through, what mediums, what platforms, what is the actual content of the work that you're creating? How does it alienate? How does it include? And lastly, I think about this a lot because our work's in public space. Like, physically, where are you housing this? Because having a show on Cherokee Street is going to be really different from having a show in Baldwin. Is going to be really different from having a show, you know, on the east side of the river. And it's just that placing it contextually in different physical geographical parts of St. Louis, because obviously St. Louis has a complex geography. Think about how it's divided socially in that way. That's also a huge component and something that we can really work on moving forward, I think, as artists.
Any advice to our to the arts patrons? You guys are brave artists. Help them be a little braver. Help us be a little braver as patrons.
I think one thing that is real important that I enjoy a lot is seeing people who might not consider themselves artists become artists or try something new. And Art Bar puts pads of paper and a jar of pencils out on the bar for you to draw. And people might come in there and become inspired and find out that they can actually draw. Or our art night over at Camp Jessup has made a lot of people come in and just want to try something out. And now we've got photographers who didn't even have a camera when they first started. And to me, I may be a little wrong in this, but like I've always had a little portion of me that thought that making art should come first if that's what you want to do besides marketing and making money, because that's going to get in the way of the image of whatever you want to see made, whatever pleases you. So part of me wants to just inspire people and have that in their heart and let them grow up on that and see where it goes.
That's beautiful, and I'd certainly second that. What I'd want to say to patrons out there was get in the game. You know, some of the greatest artists had patrons, had a large body of supporters or some sort of money that supported the art. It's only so far an artist can go before they have to go and make some money in more traditional means, such as working a job, or whatever the case may be. So I would love to see more artists get in the game and support community arts as well as people from throughout the region.
We'll leave it there. Thank you all for your time. Don't go too far because we'd like you to stay on the post show. And we want to go back outside the studio and stay in Grand Center for exploration of something called Pixel.
Currently, we are across the street from the Pulitzer Museum in this empty space that has been used this afternoon for a storytelling event.
Today's event is called United Story Interaction, with the purpose of fostering different ways that citizens and members of the St. Louis community can engage more innovatively and more creatively with each other, but also start to spark new conversations about what the city could be and what those interactions in the future could look like.
Well, we were really focused on trying to transform what was a vacant lot into something that the community could really be more engaged in. So, you know, Grand Center is an arts district, and we really wanted to take the opportunity and create something that was more interactive.
We know that if we interact more with each other and interact more with each other in a meaningful way.
There are visual arts here, there are audible projects, there are interactive performance art projects here today. And what it does, in my opinion, is increase people's understanding of what the arts can be, meaning it doesn't just have to be painting or the traditional ways of making, but having personal conversations, seeing that as an art, sharing your story, seeing that as an art form.
Hearing people's stories and sharing common events is a really good way to get to know new people and make new friends, especially in the ball pit. On each of the balls inside the ball pit, there is a question or a conversational prompt. So we use those balls to kind of spur some conversation.
There's a fantastic photo online.
Art is living. Art is making. Art is experiencing life in new ways.
Art is anything that you can enjoy. You know, something that alters your state of mind.
Piece that you did with Dana. Welcome back to the studio. We're talking now about why one might stay in St. Louis. With Karan Bolden, Street Dreams is your creation.
Yes.
I will go ahead and say for you that you've had a lot of success in the music industry.
Well, thank you.
So you don't have to say it yourself.
Okay.
But I do want to know about your story. Tell me how you got to where you are now.
Well, it goes is that when I was younger, I made music and found this great love for writing music. Felt like I was an introverted. I was kind of introverted to myself. I had lost my brother at a young age, and so they kind of made me pull back as far as expressing myself outwardly, and I was kind of shy. And one day I decided to do a rap in front of everybody at the school, like performance.
How old were you?
Talent show. I was about 11 or 12.
Okay.
And went up there, performed, and I got all this attention, and I'm like, this is where I need to be at. Like, I don't want to ever leave this place. So I started writing music and ended up getting a record deal and living out my dreams. So.
And then from there, how did you end up with a record deal to helping others at Street Dreams? What happened to that record deal?
With the record deal, there was a change in management, and the president at that time had resigned 3 weeks after we shot our video. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we were on MTV, VH1, and we shot this really great video at the Roberts Brothers house. We had the cars, the Lambos, the Bentleys inside of the car, inside of the garage, and I'm just like, wow, we've made it. But the thing about it I didn't understand was I didn't have a business plan. I just wanted to be famous. I didn't never think about, hey, how do I actually take this a step further after I actually achieved my dream? And so after he left, I just kind of gave up on my dream and gave up. I don't know why I gave up, but I think it was because I didn't have a good business plan.
So what are you doing for other people now? Tell me about Street Dreams.
Well, with Street Dreams, we came up with this crazy concept. So I was working at my job. I thought like, hey, I'm not going to go back. I'm going to go back to work. I'm not going to chase my dream anymore. I had a son, and I'm like, I'm going to stay here and take care of my son. And long story short is that my mom always told me, she said, hey, Karan, you know, you had a lot of things come in your life when you were younger. And, you know, those things have affected you inwardly. But that doesn't mean that you can't affect other people outwardly and start to express yourself. And so I started to write my music out, and I said, you know what? I'm going to stay here. I want my son to see me get up every day, ironing my shirts, going to work. And I'll give up my dream just for my son. But, you know, when you have a passion and a dream on the inside of you, there's something that just will not let that fire go out. And I was going to work, clocking in, day and out, clocking in. And something was like, you know what, you got to get back to this dream that you have on the inside of you and fulfill it, because it's so much bigger than you. This is actually for you to be a role model for your son, and not only for just your family, but for generations in St. Louis City.
So you're helping other artists now. I mean, you've got other people, giving them an opportunity as well. Is there still a certain amount of art that you are able to practice there?
Yes, I do a little something on the side. You know, when it comes to writing music. Yes, with the creation of Street Dreams, I had this big vision. I said, you know what? When I was writing music all throughout life, they always told me to go with what sells. And what necessarily sells might not be what's good for your community, if that makes any sense. And I said, you know what, I want to be brave. I want to be confident, and I want to be able to be something different than just the average, you know, musician, average rapper, average business owner. I want to be able to open up a studio for students to be able to express themselves in a positive manner with no profanity. And we opened up a studio with no profanity. We've have been vowed to that no profanity rule, and so much success has come from it.
How did people think that would work out when you said you wanted to do it that way?
You know what's amazing is that a lot of people, when I remember across the way, because I have my recording studio in the mall, and so some of the people across And my neighbors, they were like, I don't know if that'll work out. I don't know, no profanity. Like, what do you mean freedom of speech? What do you mean hip hop? That's like you have to use profanity to be able to express yourself. But what they didn't know is that there was something great on the inside of me. And that greatness on the inside of me said that I can be honest, I can be pure, I can be passionate, and I can do what I feel is true and true to me. And that's what art is. That's what creativity is. That's what art is about. It doesn't have to be a right or wrong way. It's just about doing what's in your heart. And I followed that plan, and that's why we've been successful.
Okay, don't go anywhere. I want to bring in some other folks into this conversation we're having here, and not the least of which are the folks at home via social media, #StayTunedSTL. I cut Karan off because you were talking a lot about the intersection of art and community, and that's what we want to talk about at this table. Let me introduce the other two ladies we have here with us. Boo McGoughlin, Craft Alliance Center of Art and Design. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And also Kristen Fleischman Brewer, the Pulitzer Arts Foundation. And then Karan Bolden still with us from Street Dreams. Okay, so how can art, is that a role that art is supposed to play? Can it play art for the public good? Where do you see that? I hope you see it. I hope you see it somewhere.
I'm going to jump in.
Yeah, do.
Yeah, I think it's a force for transformation, really, of communities, because art is the arena around which people come together who don't normally come together, just to start with. So you can find yourself in a conversation with somebody you would never talk to in your normal life because you're standing in a gallery reacting to something, or you're having a response to a theatrical production, or you're dancing to music or listening to it. So it really does bring a completely disparate audience together, and it creates, it sort of broadens the scope of understanding.
Swing dancing and hip hop dancing like we saw at our St. Louis Fringe there.
Exactly, exactly.
Is that happening in our town?
Definitely. To elaborate a little bit more on what Boo is talking about, I think there's also a huge group of local artists working in St. Louis in what we call social practice work in the arts. A lot of independent artists who are going to communities specifically to work with the community, find out what their needs are, and build something.
Can you tell me like what you're talking about? Give me an example.
Sure. So one artist who I adore, her name is Eileen Berman, and she is really interested in topics along Delmar Boulevard, and she's built this bike with this kind of giant carpet bag on the front, and she rides the bike to certain locations along Delmar and north of Delmar, and she parks the bike and does art projects with people in the community that may not think they have any creative talent, and she continues to go back and work with these people. So I think that definitely does a lot for the common good.
Now you get a business going, but you also have a mission in mind as well. Have you seen that those two are able to coexist?
Yes, I actually had an amazing opportunity to do a project with Opera Theater St. Louis, and Terrence Blanchard, award-winning jazz musician, he came in, he partnered in, and so they wanted to have this feel where you putting opera, and could you put opera and could you put hip hop and jazz in the same element, in the same room, and could you get the reaction and show how people from different walks of life are really saying the same message, but they're saying it in a different language. But if you put all those three things together, it was the project that we worked on. You wouldn't even think that anybody was divided. I think music, the arts, brings everybody together into one language.
Are you seeing this as well?
Absolutely. It's interesting, in talking about Eileen Berman, we had two artists who were at Craft Alliance Center of Art and Design as artists in residence. And one of them was a man named Ed Carroll, who came from Ireland, and his wife is a woman named Vida Giljuniene, and she's from Lithuania. And they came, and their art practice was to, she is a visual artist, but their practice was to really engage with the community and to create conversations that had not been perhaps happening, or maybe different conversations. And they worked with Eileen Berman, and as a result, they engaged, and they were very interested in the whole question of communities north and south of Del Mar, but they brought people together around our conversations about art who, were coming from disparate communities that have not been in that Del Mar divide conversation. And out of that, there's a lot of programming that we have going on now at Craft Alliance that just came from this work that Eileen Berman has been doing, and the fact that we engaged two people as artists in residence who were interested in mixing up the conversation. And so it's creating some programming. I mean, one program that's going to happen in our studios in July is a group of artists from North St. Louis are going to be working under the direction of a woman named Ramona Taylor Williams to really create some opportunities for making art that will create an entrepreneurial business. And that's something, that will just create a whole different conversation in our studios. That's interesting.
I guess it's easy to see how art has changed this community we're sitting in now in Grand Center.
Yes, definitely.
That was obviously, though, by design. Can you think of other ways this is happening, or can it happen in other parts of our region? In terms of, it doesn't have to mean that we have a transformative space like we have here, but
yeah. Well, I think another example of what art's doing in community, especially in a lot of entrepreneurial ways too, is what's happening on Cherokee Street. There's been a dramatic transformation on Cherokee Street. We have a new building that just opened, the Luminary Center for the Arts, now called the Luminary. They have international artist residencies. They do a lot to support local artists. There are a number of other places on Cherokee Street. Blank Space, I think, is the perfect example of how artists are taking over a space and letting other people come in and take ownership of that space. They have everything from pop-up shops, hip-hop events, concerts, poetry programs, movie nights, and with all of the effort there and the artists that are coming in, they're really transforming that street.
Is art accessible in St. Louis? Because I'm sure, do you see any of you, I'm thinking of children, that didn't grow up or haven't been exposed to it intentionally by their families. Is it accessible enough?
I think that's always an issue, but I think that the funding community in St. Louis is very interested actually in making art accessible. And I would say that at Craft Alliance, it's easiest for us to get funding for programs that are specifically directed at making certain that what we're teaching, the techniques we're teaching, are accessible. So I think it's not so accessible in the school systems because art programs have been cut, and that's really a serious problem. But I think that the funding community is interested in really supporting the efforts of artists and art organizations at making their programming really accessible.
I'm just thinking, I've heard stories of field trips where students were afraid to walk into a building because they had never been into an art museum before, or they'd never been to a place that looked like that.
Yeah. It's definitely in some of the schools that I go to, especially in the urban communities, they have a lack of exposure to art. And knowing the history of art, being educated on the art, and being able to have the right mentors to be able to build them up early. If you look at a New York, if you look at a California or Atlanta or all the places that really are big in show business, they build their kids up from the day that they're like born. And I think that if we really want to be able to have St. Louis be an arts town and known for arts, I believe that we need to start young. I think that it's a huge mistake to be able to cut the arts out, because the arts is a voice. It's more than just a talent that you're showing. It's a voice. It's self-expression, and it's the way that I talked myself out of, you know, a bad situation. I use that art, that creativity, to be able to keep my mind sound, even though everything around me wasn't sound. Even though I was growing up in certain communities that didn't have certain things and lack of education, I was able to dream bigger through art, through creativity, through writing lyrics and talking about where I wanted to go instead of where I was currently at.
We're gonna, go ahead.
Well, I really think what art is about is possibility, and that's powerful. So, there are a lot of programs. We have 690 students coming to Craft Alliance 3 times in the year and learning about art techniques and art in the galleries. I see, tons of students going to the Sheldon all the time to listen to music. I know there are a lot of students that go to the Contemporary and Pulitzer, but what it really does, it's kind of magical when you do see students get opportunities to come into contact with art that's kind of surprising and unexpected, not maybe necessarily an oil painting on the wall. It just opens up possibilities and really a sense of being able to have freedom within expression. So,
one might say art is everywhere, which is a terrible segue to a message about that very thing, and a very effective message between the 9 Network and the Regional Arts Commission. So let's take a look at that. Okay, now we're going to look into the future. We just heard that art is about what's possible, so let's kind of stick with that theme a little bit. Let me introduce our brand new table. First, Annie Spiller with Chesterfield Arts. Also, Michael Bailey with Paul Art Space, and you're also a professor at the University of Missouri St. Louis.
That's correct.
And Lisa Malandri with the Contemporary Art Museum St. Louis. Thank you so much for being here. So I guess this is going to be a fun conversation because we're looking into the possible. I guess first, let me get an evaluation first. Has the arts evolved in St. Louis? What do you see the state of St. Louis arts?
So it's really interesting. We actually were just discussing this, and I think that there
has
has
been... the room was bugged.
Okay. There's been an extraordinary growth of the art world, and I mean that in terms of practicing artists, in terms of venues in which their work can be seen, in terms of the redevelopment of certain neighborhoods that have become kind of art-centric, even in the last 2 years. And then I've only been here for 2 years, so my past history is relatively short, but you were talking about it.
Yeah, and I'm a native of St. Louis. However, I lived away for quite some time, and then my wife and I moved back in about 2002, and we thought it was going to be a layover. We had gotten bit by the East Coast bug. We love New York. That's where we had been. But it didn't turn out to be a layover, you know, and 12 years later, we're like, our eyes started opening, and we started seeing things changing. And we started seeing, as Lisa was saying, like these opportunities and possibilities, and some of it was initiative made by individuals, artists, arts collectives. Some of it was institution driven, like getting behind those individuals and helping. But just some really interesting things. And I think that momentum is what, sort of segueing back to this notion of the future. That momentum is where it might, take us to the future. What that might look like, I don't know.
Same question. It is your assessment of how things are changing, or are they changing? What have you seen in the last few years?
I think so. Definitely, I think as a whole, our society is changing to be a little bit more liberal culturally, and are a little bit more open-minded towards different possibilities. And now that we have access to everything online and we can see what's going on in other parts of the country, we know what we can do. And I think it'll be really interesting to see what happens when future generations start to have more of an impact on the community and see it grow. And then, like we were saying, people tend to come here and stay here and get involved in the city, and whatever can help the city grow, they are full-hearted involved in that process, and you can definitely see that in the arts here.
That is a fascinating component of this I hadn't thought about. With there are websites that you get hooked on. That friends pass around links to things at other museums
Pinterest
or other
and all
installations.
that,
Yeah, other things you wouldn't otherwise know about.
Around the world, yeah.
So maybe are we plugged into what's going on in the country?
Oh, for sure. I think that that's absolutely the case, and I think that that's again something that you see both on an individual level as artists working in the community. Artists have always paid attention to each other, and that's what sort of allowed them to grow their practice. And certainly we do it institutionally too. We're really interested from a museum perspective what is happening in other museums. And oftentimes I think we really like to look at our cohorts around the country to get a sense of what are they doing. I feel like a lot of times it's not only the work that they're showing, but a good idea is an idea worth stealing for your own community, and that through all of the digital media that we have available to us has really allowed us to, I think about good ideas and models for creative endeavor.
Right. I'm paraphrasing, but I think it was Picasso said something like, steal it, make it better, and then it becomes your own.
Right,
or something
that's
like
right.
That, so.
I think it was Picasso that said, steal it.
Exactly.
Okay, so where does what is the role for kind of the established, the institutions, the art fair? What's the establishment role in this kind of evolution or this experimentation we've heard about tonight?
I think a really active, good, and healthy arts community now and in the future is an ecosystem that is ever more populated. And so I think what ends up happening is that the institutions need individuals, they need more feral organizations, they need larger and bigger organizations to all kind of work together to again populate this landscape with as many choices for what art is and expression is and what it can be, and to kind of explore the definitions. So I think institutionally, what's important is to sort of look at what is your mission, what is your niche, what is what you are doing against what other institutions and organizations and individuals are doing, and just make sure that everybody's giving sort of a different voice in the chorus so that all together you can be really lively, vibrant. So for us, obviously, at the Contemporary Art Museum, it's about contemporary art. But I think that we wouldn't necessarily be a vital voice in the chorus without an encyclopedic institution like SLAM, or without a smaller institution like White Flag, or without an artist residency like, Paul Art Space. So I think that it's very much about keeping in step and in communication with what else is around you and finding the different path that you can forge.
Easily accessible too. There was a really good article, I guess the Huffington Post had posted about St. Louis and all the hidden gemstones of St. Louis, and of course everything always comes back to art. And one of the things that kind of took me, stayed with me, was how St. Louis treats the arts as a public right and not a exclusive privilege. So like she was saying, if you feed off of each other and help each other, other organizations, Chesterfield Arts working with other organizations such as CAM, you're making it more easily accessible for everyone, and then in turn it'll grow and flourish.
Right. And I think it's also a bit about in terms of keeping it, moving forward, keeping it progressive, having the larger institution, but then having those upstart, the more grassroots things, and it's a sort of checks and balance of things, and it's whether you're thinking of like, okay, we're listening to what the institution says and maybe we have critique of that, or maybe we're going to say we didn't find what we needed there, so we're going to create it ourselves. But it's all of that that begins to build this really strong fiber and something that's very rich.
Let's pause for 1 second, check in on social media. We have a question from social media and we want to get everyone else back at the table to discuss. We'll be right back. Okay, we've got the whole group back together. Let's start with a question that we just had on Twitter. Do the artists need to go where the population is, or does the population need to go where the artists are?
Well, I shared my thought. I sort of think that the population's money needs to come to the artists. It's sort of the thing where we're doing, and I know one of the segments was about brave artists, and what does it mean to be brave, and does it mean to put your checkbook out there, but there's value in this. It's what human history is sort of like understood by.
What about physically? Do we need to go where it's...
Physically, I think people, both, but I do think people tend to end up going where the artists are, because artists are, no matter what kind of practice or what sort of medium, they are transformational in their endeavor. And so they end up transforming and attracting not gentrification necessarily, but improvement, quality of life, thoughtfulness, all of these things. And so people do tend to end up going where the artists are.
Mm-hmm. We've talked a lot about different holistic approaches to things like education, how it ties into health and things of that nature. Do artists need a seat at the table when we're talking about these kind of community improvement projects?
Since they are sort of the engine, as Lisa said, of community improvement, they absolutely should be at the table. And maybe community improvement would work better and faster.
Amen. Mm-hmm. I mean, the artists are the risk takers.
Say that again?
The artists are the risk takers. They think outside the box. We are used to working interdisciplinary with people from all different backgrounds, and so I think that we're big change agents in the city, and yeah, seats at the table.
Do are artists respected enough for that role in our community?
I hope so. I mean, artists are a part of the community. I think sometimes we have these conversations and start to get very theoretical and philosophical about art and its role and all these things, but artists are a voice in the community as much as residents of different areas, as much as different industries and things like that. I do think that artists tend to have very non-linear, non-restricted ways of seeing the world, which is part of just being creative. And so they tend to see opportunities and values and maybe parts of the conversation that don't happen. I think that we're incredibly valuable voices. Some artists work in marketing as well. They don't just do art.
That's correct. Yeah, we're multifaceted. Yeah.
I want to get back to this idea of change in community. Do you see this happening on a real way, not just theoretically, as Em said?
Not at all. I think if politicians, elected officials want to bring artists to the table to really weigh in on these things about transforming community, there are plenty of artists around. You know, I don't know who's actually at the table, but not the artists I see, not the artists I know. So there's plenty of space, I would think. But the other question is, are the artists empowered enough to be able to use their voices in those kinds of ways? And I think in a city where the individual artist might be marginalized, unless he or she is able to work with a group, they may not feel like they have much to contribute because of how we frame the question. And if the question isn't framed in a way that's accessible for the artist, then how could she or he actually even make any meaningful contributions?
One thing I think about that is that when you talk about the arts, one of the reasons why I stepped into business is because when you do art, that's kind of your self-expression, but if you really want to get it out and you want to get it to the masses, you have to mix business principles with that. Absolutely. Because you can have the best product in the world, but if nobody knows about their product, it's useless to anyone. And so that's why, as our organization with Street Dreams, we've been really just trying to make sure that people have those business principles and know about marketing. As a shameless plug, there's two great artists that are in the audience right now that have huge followings. One is Kenny DeShields and the other is Shanita Jones. They are humongous in our community and they have a voice, but those people that are in power to be, or those people that want to influence our community with health and education, I think that the artists are the people that have the platforms and the influence to do that.
Yeah. The future of St. Louis art, you mentioned something about the accessibility of art in St. Louis. I'm thinking about, I believe it's Oregon, where the entire coastline is public. And you definitely think outdoors when you think Oregon. Are people going to think art when they think St. Louis?
I hope so. I think, and generally, I think it will go that way. You know, everyone was just talking about Grand Center and how all of a sudden it just kind of boomed overnight, and you see it as you walk down, you see all the beautiful signs, you see the theaters, you see even hotels and bars transforming into the architecture is more artistic, and I think, I hope, and I think it will eventually go that way.
One of the things that we do at Paul Art Space as an artist residency program is we bring artists from different places, and we've had a few international artists that have come, and they have been really wowed by St. Louis and the community and what's happening and the exchanges, and so it's been a really good, you know, some good feedback to get.
Elisa, we have 30 seconds left. I'll give you the last word here. Art is what? Fill in the blank there.
Anything that can change your perspective on your daily life, anything that can transform the way that you see anything, from the coffee cup to a grand worldview.
Thank you very much. Stick around, we'll be online. Stay tuned.9net.org. I always forget to say that. You get a sign. I think
Art is awesome.
Yeah, drop the mic.
We're back online, fair warning. But not only did you give us a great answer, but you nailed it in exactly 30 seconds. That was what I was.
You did kind of drop the mic at the end.
Yeah.
It felt like you did, please.
Yeah. Okay, we have the experimental, and we have, can I call you establishment? Is that fair? I mean, where are those intersecting? Are you taken seriously, do you think, in St. Louis in terms of what
talk about big questions.
Yeah.
I hope so. I mean, it's interesting that I think we're called experimental. I think there's a lot of perception about, you know, speaking with Fringe and what Fringe is. We've had companies that are over 100 years old producing the Fringe Festival. You know, we were having conversations earlier about some of the most respected arts professionals in the city who see an outlet and opportunity at the festival. So I think just because maybe there's something experimental or slightly radical about that, but it certainly doesn't mean that it's not esteemed or respected. And we've partnered with CAM, you know, so like we've partnered with a lot of institutions and things like that, and hopefully we're setting a foundation to become peers with them.
What else did we talk about that we should talk about more in-depthly and more thoroughly?
I think the crystal ball in the future.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. That's
so what is the future?
One thing that we actually touched on earlier that I think is really, really important is when there is institutional or individual backing for artists' endeavor. And so that means money.
Yeah.
the more money in a community that comes from a huge wide variety of sources that goes into not just supporting artists, but in commissioning work and giving artists grants, in creating paid opportunities for artists, that's when your arts community really grows in a city. And I've certainly seen it just with the Regional Arts Commission grants in the last year. When you see that, that is synonymous with a healthier, bigger, more supported, more respected, more serious arts community. And so I think that that is the thing that is really, really essential, is that people put their money where their mouth is. We care about art. Sure. It's not a frivolity. It's essential to us. You're an artist. You should make a living wage.
Mm-hmm. Michael, you came from New York. You're native, but you came back from New York. And,
right.
And I think a lot of you have come from...
I lived in New York for 5 years, and I'm a native of St. Louis.
So how does St. Louis stacking up? And maybe that's the wrong word. Stacking. Why?
I think it has I think its art scene is larger than the size of the city, and I do think we're known as a city with a really robust art life. You know, we have a great music scene. We have a visual art scene, and in terms of contemporary art has really grown a lot in the last 15 years, like by leaps and bounds. And I think the theater. I moved back here a long time ago, 1985, and there were like 2 theaters in town, and now I think there are about 57, or I don't know what the number is, but there are many, many really thriving theater groups. So it is very robust this is a town with many fewer people than a New York City. So anytime you have a lot of people and brain power bumping up against each other, it's going to make for interesting, it's like atoms colliding, and it makes for interesting things happening. So I think given our size, we've got a lot going on, but there's certainly room for people to come in. And I think what Lisa said about funding makes all the difference in the world, and who, sort of similar to the art grants would make a huge difference in this community.
Mallory, I think was it you that said that you sometimes see the same crowd?
Yeah.
Which maybe is a St. Louis thing. I don't know. I've heard people say that about restaurants, but nonetheless, I don't buy that personally. Is there a way that this is another Twitter question, follow-up question from Twitter, is how do we get more people into those crowds? How do we open up the doors there?
I think public art is important in that sense, that it really can cultivate a larger sort of cultural relationship to art and appreciation of it that hopefully will, get people to make the decision to go and participate in art on their own, instead of just sort of maybe, walking from the parking lot to a venue and they see a piece, or walking from the parking lot to a restaurant and they see something happening that is art. But then cultivating that as a way of participating in their city.
People get mad when Metro puts up art, though, right?
I think there is also this piece that's a much bigger...
Maybe it's a small minority. I don't know.
Those are the voices that we block out.
I think there is this much bigger thing, though, too, that is a lot of times because art is the unrecognizable, the previously unknown, something that is new. And I'm talking about all art forms, right? Something you haven't seen, you might not recognize, you might not necessarily think of it as art because you think of art in this very iconic way that someone showed you a statue or a... And so I do think that there is a point that we all have to take responsibility for culturally, which is reminding ourselves, both children and as adults, to stop being afraid of the things we don't recognize. To stop being resistant to things that we don't recognize, and that rather than closing oneself down in the face of the unrecognizable, that these can be really the most wonderful experiences of our lives, is these moments where we are confronted with something that is confusing or strange or unknown, and instead of saying, I don't know what that is, so I don't feel comfortable, I feel stupid, I feel unworthy, saying, I empower myself to have my own opinion about this. And that is something I feel that we really have to teach ourselves and the people around us, because those are the things that are going to make people more open to different and various art forms.
Well, I think too, this past January, the Pulitzer, we put together a program called Reset. And what we intentionally tried to do was look at art forms that people don't necessarily think about seeing in a museum. So we had a huge drag show, and just by putting that art form in the context of a big art institution was a statement to say, you know, like this is your place. You know, art doesn't have to be the statue on the wall. It is in our lives. It's out there. You're already part of this community. And so I think this accessibility and audience are always a struggle, right? Because art's accessible, but like it's not. You know, it is, but it's not. Like we have to, as bigger institutions, figure out ways to engage with these communities and find entry points so that hopefully they'll come back and they'll feel more open and responsive to having those beautiful experiences.
There's so many different audiences.
Right.
And especially in this community. There's so many, you know. So
I think, you know, something that you had mentioned, Casey, about comparing this city to other cities, and New York was referenced, you know, and there, you know, one thing in this city, and one of the things that I've seen in the last decade is that there is institutional support that there hadn't been, you know, when I lived here many years ago. But I think that other form of support coming from a collector base. So in a place like New York City, there's a collector base that for an individual artist that can maintain a studio practice. You know, and I think that it's partly the job of the institution. I think it's partly the job of the gallerists, of the dealers that say, you know, these are significant things that this individual is doing, and let me introduce you to their work, and let me tell you that you should consider including it in your collection because of this and that, you know. And so it's that sort of like willingness to invest that will allow the future to continue to go, and the momentum that we have now to just keep building, you know.
I just want to mention, I do think that there's a big challenge in St. Louis with regionalism and a lack of central access points. So coming along with this big like entrepreneurial push and spirit, there's a lot of very different opinions about how things can be done and should be done. And I think in some ways we're not doing that very well. There's not a lot of centralized access point to what's going on in the arts. You know, if I'm just here on a Thursday night and I say I want to go see a play or I want to go to an art opening or whatever, if I'm not already in that world, it's virtually inaccessible to me at all. I'm in the world and I have a hard time figuring out what's going on. And that I think is a giant elephant in the room question mark that
spread out,
needs to be discussed. And the institutions, I think, work together better than the patrons do. You know, like we've had conversations with Chesterfield Arts, we've wanted to work with them, but I think there's a lot of perception that that wouldn't happen, and I'm not sure where that comes from. Maybe someone's tweeting me about that point.
All right. That's good. All right, we'll leave it there. I feel I'm going to empower myself to not feel stupid, which is a really big problem, actually, but to if you have a podcast, I'd like to sign up for it, actually. All right. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.